Hello, welcome to the first in our series of UMAC alumni stories. My name is Kate Schaefers, and I'm Executive Director of the University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative. I'd like to also introduce two of my colleagues who are also on this call, Jane Peterson and Sean Mauer. I have a few housekeeping items to mention. We welcome your comments throughout this and your questions. We will be using the Zoom chat and the Zoom Q&A functions on the Zoom page. So if you hover your mouse at the bottom, you should be able to find the Q&A. Please put your questions there. If you have any problems or other issues, you can also put that in the chat. We also have Sean Mauer, who will be serving as our technical support. And if you have any problems, you can also email Sean at maure023@umn.edu. And Sean, you can also put that in the chat in case people didn't catch that. So I just want to also emphasize that we strongly believe that much of our workplace, that our workplace, our college campuses, our communities need people 50 plus, that they add so much to our communities, and that we should be providing learning opportunities at every life stage. So we created University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative for people at midlife and beyond as they navigate transitions and start new chapters in their lives. And our curriculum is transformational. We connect people with others who also want to make a difference in life. And so we have two series that I'd like to briefly mention. One is an online series that starts in January of 2021, and it's a two-part series. The first one is Charting a Course to What's Next. The second one is What Difference Can I Make? Then we also have our own Encore Fellows program, which is a 9-month immersion program, and all of our guests today participated in the 9-month immersion program. I'm going to do a quick check and make sure that we have everybody on our lines today. And so I see all of our speakers are here as well as our co-hosts, and I welcome you all. Terry Tempest Williams once said that stories have the power to create social change and inspire community. Our three alumni have powerful stories of letting go of who they were, of reconfiguring their lives, finding ways to use their skills for the greater good, and creating new stories about themselves that reflect a new chapter. So let me introduce our panelists today. Liz Levang built a career as a psychotherapist and author, specializing in grief and loss. As part of her transition, Liz rekindled her interest in politics, contributing to the in-district work of her congressman. Sheila Payrud was looking for direction after retiring from a rewarding career as Chief Technology Officer of a large manufacturing company. Sheila found ways to channel her skills and passions in new ways, building a portfolio life that includes board service, mentoring, tutoring, and intergenerational classes. At the end of this year, George Brewster will leave a fulfilling career in senior management with a financial services company to launch a new chapter, one that focuses on education, equity, workforce planning, and youth development. So welcome to our panelists. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and unmute your or bring your video on as well. So Sheila, I see you. And George and Liz, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm trying, but it tells, can you hear me? But it tells me I can't. So I think Sean said,
okay.
The host has, it says the host has stopped it. So.
Right. And mine says the same.
Okay. So let me, I will ask you to start your video. Let's see if that works.
Yep, I think it will. Good.
Perfect. Sorry for that. We're also learning some of these techniques.
There we go.
As well.
Change is great.
I just want to start with a conversation about the transition itself. And I know, especially for you, Sheila, let's start with you. You worked for your whole career with the same company and then left that. And can you talk a little bit about what that transition was like for you, Sheila?
Okay, so I would say, first of all, I really didn't have time to think through retirement because I was working crazy hours and I had no control over my schedule until boom, I was carrying my plants and framed pictures out to my car. And it didn't take me very long to realize a lot of things were missing. I was kind of like the cliche of not understanding how much of my purpose and self-definition and my social life was associated with work. And really, a lot of that just disappears overnight. And so the realization dawned on me then that I had to do something to start building that back.
Mm-hmm. And so for you, that was you left not necessarily having a clear understanding what that was going to be like, and then was faced with trying to kind of find your way through it. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And then, you know, through a networking relationship, I found out about UMAC. Mm-hmm. And I know that I needed some structure in my life to kind of be able to explore it, back up, figure out what that process should look like, and really get help going through it. And that's kind of why I chose to go back to UMAC.
Yeah. And how about you, Liz? You also had a very engaging career. So what was your transition like?
Well, I was at a point in my life, Kate, where I felt really stuck. We were moving out of our big house and my life was about to change. Should I retire? Should I keep writing and collaborating with peers? You know, should I build up my psychotherapy practice? I didn't know where to turn and I really lacked in self-confidence. So when I read the Star Tribune article about Dr. Moen and UMAC, I became curious enough to fill out an application. And I remember being asked during that interview process if I was willing to be vulnerable. Now that's a big word. And but I took that seriously. And I wanted to be authentic and I wanted to be able to be with a group of different people who didn't know me. And so really UMAC was a turning point for me about self-acceptance and finding out where could I be in life.
Mm-hmm. And George, you're just entering that process. You've been doing this planning all year, and your transition will happen at the end of the year when you leave your corporate job and shift into something else. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about where you're at and the experience around transition for you.
Yeah, well, where I'm at is I still, quote unquote, people will say, what are you going to do on January 2nd? You know, that's the question. I'm actually down in one of our offices down in Plano, Texas right now, just as part of, Sheila and I were joking earlier, kind of the farewell tour a little bit. And that's the question I get a lot. And I don't have the answer right now. That's kind of, I believe that that's going to come to me. And you know, similar to Sheila and Liz, my process, it's been a process. You know, I started awakening in 2017, 2018 I want to get back more on purpose in my life. What I'm doing and the job that I have has allowed me great privilege. It has fulfilled a sense of purpose, but a sense of, I was also sensing I was becoming the cantankerous curmudgeon and that it was time to move on. And UMAC, because I wasn't fully focused on, I work in sales and marketing and supporting our field force across the country, and all of that work, you know, is good work and it's helpful to those people. But at this point in my life, I was just sensing a deeper calling from a sense of purpose. And so I, like Liz, I didn't know you had seen the same Q&A with Dr. Moen that I had seen. And it was on a Sunday morning. We don't even get the Sunday paper, but it appeared on our driveway that Sunday morning. And I read that section and I read that interview and I passed it down to my wife, Robin, and she said, wow, that sounds like something you should look into. And I looked into it, took part in it. I think I was looking for the introspective side of what it would do for me, the cohort of people like Sheila and Liz and my cohort of 7 in my particular year. It would expose me to possibilities and it would increase the kinds of networks that we all know as mature professionals you need if you're going to find a job. You don't just luck into it or apply for it on Indeed. And so So here I am. I'm on my farewell tour, and it's, so I mean, I'm going through all of the kinds of disengaging, disaffiliating, and almost disembodying things right now in November and December. But I'm very, very excited for, what I will figure out as kind of my portfolio life come first quarter, first half of next year.
Yeah. So you mentioned Dr. Moen. Let me just do a quick aside. So Phyllis Moen is our founder, and she is a professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota. And she's been studying this phase of life. She coined the term encore adulthood as a new life stage between the career building and family building years, but before frailty of old age. And she believes that we have this whole new life stage of potential. And so her academic work has focused on that, and then launching UMAC was her way also to put in all she's learned in her studies into something practical. But I also want to ask all of you, so I know for so many of us, our identities are tied up with what we do. So how do we introduce ourselves? We introduce ourselves by our careers. And for a lot of people, as they enter this life stage, they ask the question of, who am I now that I'm not who I was? And I wonder, Sheila, maybe could you talk a little bit about, you had a pretty big job and it was pretty all encompassing and a huge piece of your identity. What helped you transition out of that sense of self that came with that job?
Okay, so it was really a shock. I would not have guessed I had so much of my, I'll call it ego, wrapped up in that job and the importance of the job. I didn't think I was that person. But all of a sudden, where I find myself with all this energy and all this time, I really was kind of like a caged hummingbird. And I had to really think through, how do I find a new identity? I remember even early in the UMAC program, we were giving our life stories. And I'm giving mine, and like a lightning bolt partway through it, I realized, oh my God, I'm talking about my career as if I'm still in the middle of it. And that's, it was just such an amazing thing to realize I hadn't given up that yet. And so really what helped me, actually, I don't want to sound like an advertisement, but the program really did help me do that, because you're going through it with a bunch of people at the same stage of life, and you're learning what parts of you at your core you're going to take from your job and something else with, and what parts you're going to shed. And so, as I said, ultimately it was very freeing, but it took a while to get to that point. So there was things like I would say about myself, I'm a lifelong learner. I want to have an open mind. I want to give back. But if you're sitting there cleaning your house and like a maniac in your garden and you're not doing those things, how do you know that's even true? So the structure of the program kind of pushed me into figuring out, is that true, or is that just a story I'm telling about myself? So I did use the program to kick me out of my I'll call it comfort zone, and actually do something differently.
Mm-hmm. And George, for you, it was a process, I think, of reconnecting with an earlier identity. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't, 3-4 years ago, I didn't think about the fact that the first 12 years of my life, I had worked with young people and training adults as leaders to work with young people and helping young people assess who they are and who they're becoming. But being across these last few years, and particularly through the UMAC experience of discerning what kind of social impact do we want to have. We did an exercise, I remember, in September of 2019, towards the beginning of the program, where we had there were different kinds of social impact that could have interest in us. And at that time, young people and education equity, that wasn't necessarily the first thing I thought of. But the more I really thought about, what is this wanting to get back on purpose? Well, what is that purpose? And what am I good at? Whether it was in my first 12 years out of college or in this business career that I've had. And it's come around helping people develop into the person that they most want to be or that will be most successful. And so it's really been life-giving to now find a path or a vein back, hopefully, into working more directly, whether it's direct service or management of direct service in an organization that works with young people. So I think that it's been, I feel like I'm getting back in touch with that identity of the person I was maybe before I was in business and before the trappings of a successful career that is business.
And now bringing all of that life experience to that same kind of,
I'm a much
area.
different person now than I was at
Yeah.
32, 33 or 34 when I left that work. Yes.
Yeah. So Liz, you mentioned just not necessarily feeling confident, and I think about your career. I mean, you were very successful. I mean, you had written books, and so as a career, I think there was probably a lot of confidence that went with that. But shifting out of that may have shifted some of that for you. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that process for you.
Yeah. Yes. Being a writer is very rewarding when you know that what you've written impacts people's lives. And I had that sense of not so much being a leader, but being an inspiration to others. And I really worked very hard to craft myself as someone who knew a great deal about bereavement and could speak about it, could write about it, and could help others in that very difficult point in their life. So having to step back from that, knowing that there was more for me to do, meant that I had to look at how much success do I want? Does it make any sense to be that kind of person? And so I had to shed really that persona of a successful writer and to think about how else do I contribute to the world? How else do I reach people? And what am I doing for myself? Being a writer is kind of anonymous. You know, your picture's in the back of the book, but who knows you? And so it's a kind of strange position to be in. But I did realize that that I had more to give, and that's what I wanted to do, is to find other outlets to be helpful to people, to invest in people, and to invest in myself.
I think a common sense that people sometimes will have is that they want to be moving from success to significance. And I think that is something that is part of this life stage of, while you may have had some success, how can you now look at investing your time and energy differently? And I know all of you have talked about your careers being rewarding and meaningful and all of those pieces that we talk about, but what does meaningful work mean to you today in this life stage? And how is it different maybe from what it was earlier in your career? So I'll just open that up to all three of you. So who'd like to start with that?
Wow, I'll go for it then. Okay, I would say that it does have to have a purpose, and I'm probably much better at this one-on-one form of giving back. So purpose, giving back, one-on-one. I want to learn from the relationship equally to what I am giving in it. So the tutoring of kids, I mean, I think to me is a huge part of it. And then I do mentoring as well. So I have to have learning. I have to feel like I am worthy. I have to feel like the skills I have match with what the person needs of me. And, those are the main things I am going for in terms of what I'm doing now.
So that more direct one-on-one is really powerful for you at this point. Yeah.
Yes.
And for me, the first word that comes to my mind when I think about meaningful work is something that has a purpose. And that is something that benefits others in some way, but is also personally satisfying to me. So meaningful work also defines a give and take relationship, like Sheila mentioned. And I think that meaningful work allows us to continue to grow as individuals and continue to contribute to society. And meaningful work isn't necessarily work that comes with a paycheck. Rather, it is redefining that old paradigm and making investments in society and in ourselves. You know, one of the principles that I learned as a child was that golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that guidance still defines my life today. I want to remain invested in others by lending a hand when and where I can. And I want to remain relevant by staying actively engaged in the world around me, and also being able to share those gifts and talents that I bring to the table.
Liz, you bring up a good point about, you know, for some people this is paid work, and for some people it's unpaid work, but it's more how you combine it in your life. And for a lot of people, they're looking for that meaningful work and still also need that paycheck. And so finding those routes to that kind of work is also really important. George, do you have any thoughts to add?
I appreciate what you were saying, Liz, about, you know, purpose. I guess my response, Kate, would be, you know, a mantra of mine in both my business career and then working in a nonprofit setting with young people. I've heard this attributed to different people, famous people, Plato or St. Bonaventure or whatever, but this idea that work or life or vocation is found, and success is found at the intersection of the work the world most needs you to do with the work you most want to do, and or the work that the world is calling you to, that you feel most called to do. And so for me now, what that means, I'm in a spot where I'm not at my number for a full-time retirement, so I am looking for, you know, some form of employment. It doesn't need to pay a lot of money, but I need some of that. My wife is expecting me to make a little bit of money. She's a little bit scared that I'm cutting out a few years earlier than I might have otherwise. So that's a unique thing for me, maybe different than, I don't even know, for Liz or Sheila. But ideally, what meaningful would be to take what I used to do, blend it with some of the business and management disciplines in an ideal world where I can feel most alive, because I know that it's going to be found at that intersection.
Yeah. And I think, George, what you're talking about, I think, is a very common sense of needing to work, maybe wanting to work, but wanting a sustainable career that is giving you that sense of fulfillment, but then also the ability to add other things into your life.
Yes.
And so that idea of a sustainable career and earning some income going forward can also really help people out financially during that time before they are full-time financially retired. So there's the piece of meaningful work because it is good for us and engaging, and that give back is so important, but then there's also the reality of a financial need. So bringing both of those together is really important. So I'd also like to talk about, you know, one of the things that is so important is that as you're trying to figure out what's next, to try things out and to, you know, take little steps to experiment with different options and see what you like, and you know, just giving yourself the space and the freedom to craft experiments and try things out. Sheila, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what are some of the experiments that you crafted and what you learned from those experiences.
Okay, so first of all, I'm kind of experimenting with even applying for a job, because I'm called the midtermship. And some of that was extremely awkward. They don't know what to do with me. I don't have my typical things I would talk about because it doesn't make sense in the context. And so some of those experiments were very difficult. And when I ended up going to Experience Corps, which I did my midtermship on, they were so happy to have me. I was just bent over backwards to do anything. So really what I did there was I worked on a merger that they were doing with another organization called Eastside Learning. So I worked on their board governance and their communication strategy to their stakeholders and things of that sort. So those were things I was good at from a work standpoint. But in order to really understand the businesses there, I became a tutor, because that's what they did. They tutored in reading. And I found from that experiment that I absolutely loved working with these kids. The kids were very generous in their affection and in their trust, and I learned a lot from them, but I realized I just really had no business in the management of any kind of nonprofit. I found too much ego going on there. I found a lack of accountability that drove me crazy compared to the environment I was from. So kind of that's what I got out of that experience. But again, that's where I never thought I'd want to work with kids, but that's what it taught me. I just absolutely love it, and I'll do that as long as they'll have me.
Yeah, and that stretching out of your comfort zone, trying something new, and then being, for you, that was delightful, but it's also a great learning experience, realizing that maybe being in a nonprofit organization more as a leader is not necessarily the best fit for you. And one of the things that is so important as people look at transitioning from a sector, so from, the private sector into some kind of an NGO or a nonprofit organization, there's so many cultural differences and structural differences, and constituents are different. And so understanding some of those things are so important if you want to make that kind of transition. But the crafting the experiment is also, you learn from both of those experiences, whether it was a great fit and opened up new opportunities, or you say, that's not what I want. So Liz, could you talk a little bit, because you did some work with your congressman and you had a background with politics, but this is something different.
Right. I had spent 6 years in municipal government, and over that time, you learn so much. How to build a road, what are building codes and setbacks, and municipal water and joint powers, and all these tremendous things. But what do you do with them when you leave municipal government? I really had no clue as to what I could do. But I really loved politics, and so I decided to try to get a mid-internship with with Congressman Dean Phillips from my district. So it was a little intimidating, working at the federal level. That was not something that I had ever imagined that I could do. But from the get-go, they appreciated the experiences that I had, and they matched up with what they wanted to do. The congressman wanted to visit each of the 36 cities in the district. And so that became my job, to set up those interviews and actually to go with the congressman and his chief of staff to those meetings. And I'll tell you, that was pretty scary to be sitting elbow to elbow at a conference table with the congressmen and mayors and city administrators. But I really stunned myself by being able to find a place to not ask stupid questions, and to feel that I was really welcomed and part of the team. So like Sheila, I have told the congressman I'm staying as long as I can. And when you're tired of me, you can kick me out. But I'm with you, and I'm part of your team from now on.
Well, and from what I've heard too, he has so valued, having not just he obviously loves having young adults in these roles, but also having an experienced person on the team.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
So
George,
yeah. So George, you did a lot of informational interviews as part of your discernment and just really trying to get the lay of the land on education equity and workforce planning. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience was like in experimenting and, opening up new conversations?
Uh-oh, the light in this office just went off. Hang on, I'm gonna move. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I'm in an office, a different office than my normal one. So, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, and Kate, I didn't come into September of 2019 thinking education equity. Those words I'd heard of educational disparities, but I didn't understand sort of this nonprofit niche or social impact called education equity. Ironically, the office that I run in St. Paul for an affiliate of Securian Financial Group, we ended up bringing in our first cohort of 4 young people that go to Cristo Rey Jesuit High School, which is an education equity program. I didn't know that that's what it was called, or that was the realm of what Cristo Rey does. So that was almost the start to it, and that was going on as I was going through UMAC. But then, Kate, part of my process has been just the one-on-ones that we had, the 2 or 3 one-on-ones through the year, where you knew me uniquely, you knew what my thumbprint or my aspirations might be, but you were helping me with some ideas, and you networked me into one individual that the education equity community in the Twin Cities is a pretty tight-knit community. Even though they might be competing for some similar, development dollars, they very much are committed to this idea of first-generation underrepresented populations, just trying to level the playing field to help them, not just financially, but socially and culturally. And so that one informational interview that I did with a gentleman named Matt Ladoff he introduced me to 3 people in organizations that I had come to hear about and know about as I came to understand education equity. So in the months of February, March, and April, I got to know about 6 or 7 different education equity organizations in the Twin Cities. And I think it just, and so then finally, as I met each of them, of course, they're in need of volunteers. And with COVID, unique to my experience, that really shut down any internship or midternship that is part of the UMAC program. But what I've been doing, I'm mentoring in 3 different education equity organizations. I'm doing mock interviewing in another one, and then in 2 organizations, I'm doing resume coaching. And it's fed and fueled and reaffirmed that I love working with young people. It's less about the resume. It's more about helping them just sort of relax and become the person they're being. But, so that's been my experience and my process.
So for all of you, it's just been an evolution and stretching out of comfort zones, trying new things, doing things maybe you didn't anticipate working, and just finding your way through that. I'd like to also talk a little bit about lifelong learning, because I do think, part of aging well and part of engagement in this life stage is also continuing to grow and to learn new things. And all of you had opportunities to stretch academically as well. So I wonder, could we start with you, George? You volunteered in an integrative leadership class that had students from all over the university focused on integrative leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was like?
You bet. I loved it. Again, 12 years on the front end of my career spent working with high school and college age young people, watching them mature and develop. Being in a classroom on this side of life was phenomenal. Just being back in the aura of a classroom, and then interested in pedagogy and all of that, just watching how today's, with technology, how technology is used and how young people do interact maybe similarly to or different from, and how they use their phone. And it gave me an appreciation for what education is today in a higher education organization. It was cross-sectoral leadership. So when you and Liz were speaking earlier about that, I was very interested in it, because it was about nonprofits, for-profits, and government, and how do they work together. And so me having been in a nonprofit my first 12 years, and then my for-profit experience, so it was just very, very stimulating. And the conversations that it was co-taught by 3 people, but the conversations that they fostered both in the whole class, but then at tables, and so it was just thrilling and invigorating to hear, to participate, and yet also to be looked to for an opinion, whether it was nonprofit people or government people wondering what the business guy thought, because I was the oldest person in the class. However, there were a few people that were within 4 or 5 years of my age as well, so it wasn't just all traditional aged students. And so I think I think the other thing, my other part of that was helpful, was that each of the small groups had to develop a project of some sort to solve some sort of issue So it was cross-sectoral. How would you do it cross-sectorally? My cohort that I gravitated to was focused on workforce planning, and they looked at my staffing and training background a lot. So they were tapping into how that would be. So I was a resource to them. I didn't know that I would end up in that kind of capacity. I mean, I didn't do their project, but they asked me for practical thoughts or reactions.
Mm-hmm. So it was an interesting experience being an adult, learner coming back from your own college experiences to be in that kind of
Absolutely.
a classroom. And Liz, now you did a class on power systems, which was co-taught, I want to say, by an engineer, right? And
Yes.
so what was that like? Because it was really outside of your academic preparation, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, the course was called Power Systems, and it was taught by an engineer and an architect. The grand challenges at the university pair up professors from two different disciplines. So when I walked into the classroom, and Sheila was with me, the majority of the students were seeking that engineering degree, and I had zero knowledge of engineering, but I had great desire to learn about this, aspect of our existence. And we were required to create and produce two major projects involving the use of energy. And I was fortunate enough to work with two young gentlemen who were bright and eager and very willing to partner with me. And by combining our skills, we were able to develop this very creative project, and that earned really high accolades from our instructors. And I learned, an amazing amount about our electric grid, about alternative energy, climate change, and more. And really, it was pure joy working with these younger students and finding that we could work together as a strong team, and that even though I knew nothing, I still had something to contribute, and that we could share those experiences together. It really was quite wonderful. And I would, it has led me to continue taking courses at the university, and I think I'll do that until I can't do it anymore.
Yeah. And Sheila, I know one of the classes you took was on children of the social class divide, and that was really powerful for you. Do you want to share any words about that?
Well, I would say that that class, as well as the rest of my usually take two a semester, really changed my life. That particular class, I think the biggest impact it had was maybe I was a little bit of a bootstrapper in beliefs. I hadn't really articulated that if you work hard enough in this country, you can. Yeah. And that class really went through things in such a methodical manner that I understood the whole socioeconomic gap in a completely different way. So it had a huge change, but I continue to take these classes. And then I would say that it does take some courage. You're a little bit of a freak. Mm-hmm. Person in the class, and then you break into groups. They always have group projects, and here you hulk over to the team you're going to work with, and they maybe do view you a little bit oddly. But I can't say enough about how much I get out of it. Ultimately, if I behave correctly, I always end up with a great relationship with them. And by behaving correctly, I mean, don't say too much. There's a tendency to want to be a know-it-all. I have to crank it back, just learn from them. And they will really teach me about perspectives of their age group, which I can't say how much I value.
Yeah, so you're all really going in as learners, and
Yes.
they're there to learn from young adults and to listen and to let them show the leadership. And so it's a different role coming from leadership roles in your careers to go in as a learner and someone who's going to nurture that in young adults. So why don't we pause here? And Jane, do you have any questions that you want to share from our audience?
I do have a couple of questions that we'll talk a little bit about retirement issues. One is there seems to be two camps from those going into retirement. Those who have a detailed plan and those who roll into retirement deliberately without a plan because they believe it will be revealed after they retire. So do you have a thought about which has proven the most successful, and would you change it? And then the next is, how do you balance doing something new after retirement with not wanting to work 40 hours per week?
Mhm.
So let's start with the planning piece. And I think with our three panelists, we have some different approaches on this.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
go
well,
ahead, George.
as the one of the three of us that, is not yet, beyond sort of the threshold. I mean, come the end of the year, for me, I guess I've just learned through my life, and I think it's been reinforced in this process to trust the process, but I needed to start a process. I think I wanted to start the process believing that by November 11th that I'd know exactly what I'm going to do on January 2nd. But I think as I've gone through the process, I've just gotten more comfortable with, okay, trust the process. I'm trusting the process. I don't know if it'll be January 1st, March 1st, or July 1st before I have a paid for job. Fortunately, I'm privileged enough, financially privileged enough to where I can take that approach. So to me, it's kind of it's kind of in between both of those juxtaposed realities that we're given.
Mm-hmm. And so for a planner, it can be uncomfortable not having that certainty, but yet having too much certainty also closes opportunities and you don't look at things. And so that's the balance for you.
Yes.
Sheila or Liz, do you have a perspective you want to share on that?
You were going to go next, I think.
Oh, okay. I didn't really have a plan. When we decided to put our house up for sale, that was the impetus to think about, well, okay, you're leaving the big house and that life, that neighborhood, that community, and how is that going to change? Because we moved to a different part of the city, and we're in a position to make new friends, make new connections and networks. And so I began to think of myself as semi-retired because I didn't want to work 40 hours a week. I wanted to be able to explore other options and to see what other possibilities were out there. And so I still like to call myself semi-retired. And I don't know when I will really be able to embrace that world retired, because I think in my profession, I can keep working as long as I want to. And as long as I feel like I'm making a difference and that I'm getting something out of it too, I'm going to continue along this pathway. And retirement, I don't know if that will really happen. I think about my dad who retired at 62 and had a long, long life of leisure and making new connections in the family and doing things he never would have had the time to do. But I think my path is going to be different than that.
Well, and Liz, I think you're also talking about that balance, which was kind of the second question about, wanting to be semi-retired. I've also heard semi-working as another way to frame it. But it's, bringing work into your life, but not have it dominate the same way, and leaving space for some of those other things. And I think sometimes people do jump in too much to begin with, and then create this this other life that has just as much demand across different areas. And so it is something that it's got to be purposeful too on just what is it that you're wanting. Sheila, do you have anything to add to either of those questions?
I mean, I honestly thought that I was going to retire and just hang out and spend time with my husband and have an organized house for once. And I mean, that was just so ridiculous because that's not who I am. I don't know what I was thinking. So the whole deal of just plowing into it with no plan, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, so you did, cold turkey from work and jumped right into this life that wasn't really reflecting what you want. But then since then, you have added things into your life and created this portfolio that maybe gets to that second question of, providing some of that balance between work and other kinds of things.
And I can identify with that person that asked that question, because I do have some consulting projects. I have a paid board position, and I do the tutoring and the mentoring. I could easily go off that cliff with my personality disorder of taking on too much. But I'm learning to say no. And like this consulting project I took on was too big. I dragged a friend of mine in there with me as a partner, which just made it feel much more fun. There are things that you recognize faster that you're doing.
So it's a learning process, and it's recalibrating as you go as well. Yeah. So Liz, you oh,
Okay, one question before,
yep.
in case we run out of time, there's one question that they do want you to answer.
Okay.
How will you maintain the UMAC cohort vitality and benefit with the spring 2021 virtual program? So before we wrap up, if you could answer that question.
Yes, I'm really glad that someone asked that question. You know, one of the things, you know, with COVID, we were forced into a new direction, but I want to say this has been on our mind for a while, and we really wanted to create an online version that would allow us to reach people not only in the metropolitan Twin Cities community, but that people could participate from anywhere. And so we had this in mind, and I think COVID gave us that push to actually pull it together. And we have been very purposeful in looking at how can we create community through a virtual tool, and using some of the readings and the reflective exercises, which, you know, I know Liz had talked about being vulnerable, that will allow people to open up and to be authentic and to create that kind of a relationship with a smaller cohort, allows people to figure out what they want to do and really process what's going on. And it's a bit of a dilemma, or, you know, when people are looking at introspection, a lot of times we think that we'll do that by ourselves. So we might journal, or we might just think about things. But the research show that we do that best when we come together with other people and process out loud. And so those pieces are built into the online. So it's partly the reflective materials that create this space for people to come in an authentic way, those smaller group discussions, and we will have speakers, but we'll also have smaller circles so people can join together and have those personalized conversation about their own situation. And then that creating that community around people who are looking at giving back in this next stage, and having that be a piece of what they're wanting to bring into their lives, whether it is through paid work or civic engagement. So both of those.
And we did, it made Kate unique again to my experience was, you know, we went from being in person to online. I mean, even, you know, you and Jane, Sean, Phyllis had to adjust everything on the fly. Fortunately for my cohort of 8 of us, you know, we had spent 6 or 7 months together, but I would underscore, just based on my experience, March, April, May, before our cohort was complete, that the way that Kate and the program facilitates kind of a greenhouse of conversations through ideas, through introspection, et cetera, while, you know, this screen pulling us apart from in person, it diminishes to an extent, but it did not diminish my experience of UMAC having gone from in person to online. So I just think an exceptional job of creating an environment for the kinds of conversations that my cohort of 8 people really needed to have.
Well, and I think that's a great lead into this issue of community. And I know for a lot of people, when they are thinking about leaving the workplace, I mean, so much of our social interactions are in the workplace. And when people do leave, and, you know, I don't know for you, Liz and Sheila, if this resonates, but when people leave, oftentimes they talk about missing being part of a team, working for shared goals and accomplishments, and being part of something bigger than you are. And so can you each maybe talk a little bit about, you know, how you build community and how you build those new connections, because it is important once you leave the workplace to find those new connections and those new networks and those, you know, that new sense of community.
Well, I think that, you know, there's certainly a downside to leaving your employment and all those friendships. Like, you know, Sheila was talking earlier about, you know, people wanting to thank you and give you gifts and all of that. And it's a little bit embarrassing and a little bit difficult. But, you know, I think that one of the beauties of UMAC was that ability to bond with an entirely new group of people and to value the importance of new relationships. You know, people that you worked side by side with can still be part of your life. But with UMAC, you get an opportunity to be stimulated by another group of people and to find fun-loving, empathetic people just like yourself who are wandering through this desert and not being sure where they want to go. I would say that the bonds that we formed in our cohort are going to last the rest of our lives. You know, Sheila and I and others meet once a month, and we take courses together at the university, and we really do see each other as family. And I value that tremendously. You know, you think that the little group that you have around you is it, and you're so afraid to leave it. But there's so many possibilities out there for new friendships and new networks. I think that was just a really tremendous part of UMAC, was the ability to form a new family.
And George or Sheila, anything to add?
I would just add to that, and that was very well said. I would just add that, you know, just taking or proving to yourself that you have the courage and energy to push past kind of the fear that overcomes you when all of a sudden you don't have all of that you're used to having so long. And to me, that's what the program gave me at the end of it.
Mm-hmm. George, any thoughts?
Nothing really
I know,
to add.
yeah,
I mean, just the you know, the emphasis on the community. I just, in my life, I have valued learning communities. You know, my undergrad was at an institution that really valued learning communities. You know, a long time ago, learning communities became a buzzword more through the 90s and 2000s. But that was what my experience was, and that's what it is, like the soil, you know, that sort of nurtured seeds of ideas for me.
Well, in this process also, you needed to rebrand yourself to tell a different story about yourself. Leonardo DiCaprio once said, "Every next level of your life will demand a different you." And I wonder if that resonates.
It does. I mean, you know, how, for me, you know, how do I, as I'm going into these education equity organizations, but I'm this head of a sales and marketing organization. What's the connection? What are you thinking about? What are you looking for? Over time, I can say, and I know in our cohort early on, people were asking questions, you know, like LinkedIn. If you're using LinkedIn, you know, I'm still working. You know, but how do I represent that I'm open to, you know, my company's known for 2.5 years, I'm going to be leaving, but how do I use LinkedIn to represent that I'm looking for something else? And so I've had to experiment with that, you know, on my profile, because as I started doing more networking, I knew a lot of people were out on LinkedIn and they'd look at my profile before they networked with me. Well, I didn't want them to just see that I was this sales and marketing executive. I wanted them to see that, you know, the core purpose that I'm driving towards, and that I am free to leave at the end of the year, things like that. So LinkedIn was something, Kate, I haven't even had a chance to talk to you about, but it's gotten so clear to me sort of what my credo is. I didn't say I want to build a credo, but about a month ago, I just felt inspired, and it had sort of 3 tenets to it. And then that's helping me too with, okay, now when I do get to a spot where I'm actively looking for some sort of work, you know, how will my resume, how do I want to morph that? You know, what's going to be important to somebody, again, now, not so much what I did in the past, but what am I looking for? So for me, those have been 3 things, just 3 practical things.
Yeah. Anything to add, Sheila or Liz?
Well, I would just say again, it's kind of like I did it once. I rebuilt and changed my definition once. It'll be easier the second time, I hope. I went 62 years before doing it.
And I think that, you know, that we all reinvent ourselves at different stages of our life. You know, when we become an employee, when we become a parent, when we have grandchildren, all of those, change us. And when I look at this next chapter of my life, I think it's easier to think about recreating myself and finding a new pathway in life. I don't feel afraid like I once did. I'm not worried about having to find just the right rocking chair. It doesn't matter to me. That's not a concern of mine. I feel like I'm a lifelong learner. I can do it. I've sat in classrooms with kids who could be my grandchildren, and I've been accepted. And I felt that UMAC gave me a safety net to explore all of those things, all of those possibilities. And there was always someone there who would catch me if I fell. And so UMAC has been a tremendous, tremendous life-changing experience for me. And I really hope that those who are listening today take this seriously and take a look at the experiences that the three of us have had and say, hey, I'm going to go for it too.
Mm-hmm. So Jane, are there any last minute questions? Because I see we're coming to the end of our time.
One was, what is the most significant thing you have learned about yourself during the Encore process, transitioning to a new focus?
It's a great question.
My short answer to that would be that my life has proven that I am a resilient transitioner. It gave me the chance to look back and see I had to make some quick pivots in my life and make some adjustments, and things didn't always work out, but UMAC helped me reinforce in me the confidence that I am a resilient transitioner.
And I would echo that. I feel like I gained self-confidence that I don't know that I would have found before. I was surrounded by a cohort of wonderful people who accepted me for who I was, but then, helped to shape me in a new way, and were willing to look at me as a fresh new friend and someone that they could make a bond with. And that confidence means the world to me today.
And then I would not following directions ever. This person asked for one, but I would still give 3. I can make new friends. I know I need to feel like I'm giving back to the world in some way. And I have energy and courage to keep changing.
Mm-hmm. And any last minute advice that you would have, thoughts, advice you have for anyone who's entering into this stage?
Well, the one thing that I would say is, when you look at the cost of UMAC, I would tell you it was worth every penny, every penny.
I told somebody Christmas of 2019, I'd only been through 4 months, and they were asking me, people in family gatherings, how's it going? Somebody said, do you think it's worth it? And I said, if it ended today, I've already gotten my money's worth. And that was before the final 5 months. My piece of advice is just keep taking steps, chucking logs. If you chop down a tree anywhere, you can't over engineer the log pile you got to build. Just start chucking some logs, and pretty soon you start to find things you want to do, and find excitement and energy.
Well, I would say it's an investment. You'll make it back. That's right. I wasn't even looking to make any money. More has come my way than I would ever thought.
Amen.
Well, I want to say thank you to our panelists, our fellows. It's been delightful to hear your stories and to reconnect in this way, and also to tell everyone who's participating. We will have another of these series in December 14th. I'll send you information in an email follow-up to this, and also to just let you know that we are recruiting for our spring online, which starts in January 2021, as well as our fall fellows program, which starts in 2021 in the fall. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll follow up with an email, and we wish you well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.